We are live. Hello, everybody. I am so excited. I am David Levithan, and I'm so excited today to be hosting our inaugural Read with Pride event for this year with Lucas Rocha, Kacen Callender, and Leah Johnson. Just want to start and acknowledge that obviously this is a very strange and hard day to be having a reading or having any kind of event or any kind of celebration because there is so much not to celebrate right now. But it is June 1st. It is the start of Pride Month, but we just wanted to acknowledge that really Pride is about not just queer issues, but about all issues of equality. And being proud is about being able to be proud not just of your queerness, but about any aspect of your identity and everybody else around your identity. So we are going to be celebrating Pride, but we also really want to say the commitment to social justice and equality is not just a queer issue. It is an issue for everybody. And we really, really want to acknowledge that with everything that's going on. But we also do want this to be a celebration of these three authors and these three books because they are remarkable authors and remarkable books. Lucas's book is coming out tomorrow. Dun, 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 show it there. It is just a phenomenal book, translated from the Portuguese. Lucas is coming to us from Brazil, and it just tells a story that we don't really hear very often in our literature about queer boys dealing with issues of HIV. It is really honest. It is really funny at times and really sad at times. And just it reads like life. And it's just remarkable. And it's remarkable to have a debut. And it's remarkable to have Lucas here again, all the way from Brazil. Not quite as far from me as Brazil is Indiana, where Leah is. And Leah's debut, You Should See Me at Crown, is also coming out tomorrow. It is phenomenal. It is just such a both joyful but also meaningful book. One review, I think, called it like the perfect queer rom-com, which it is. But really, it's not just rom and it's not just com. It really is about taking stock of just a character you grow to love. And many people in our office say, we just want to be friends with her. And just really brings to life this amazing story. And then Kacen just has somehow managed to write not just one of my favorite, if not my favorite middle grade books of the year, but also one of my favorite YA books of the year. We are going to focus a lot on King and the Dragonflies, the middle grade, which came out. It just won the Boston Hornbook Award, which is incredible. Yeah. And it's an astonishing story, which Kacen will tell you about. But also, Kacen's just released Felix Ever After, which again is one of my favorite YAs of the year, which again just gives you insight into a lot of issues of identity, but also some really amazing friendship issues and how identity and friendship and romance can all commingle in very complicated ways. So again, I could not be more excited about being with these three authors to talk about their books, talk about being a queer writer during Pride Month. And so to start off, I'm going to ask each of the authors to introduce their book a little more thoroughly than I just did, and also to read just a little taste of the book so you can get a flavor of the writing and the storytelling. So why don't we start with Lucas?
Oh, okay, no pressure. Hi, everyone. So I'm Lucas Rocha. I'm calling directly from São Paulo, Brazil. And that is where we go from here, which comes out tomorrow, side by side to Leah's book. So I'm very excited about it. So this is a book about love, a book about friendship, and a book about HIV. It sets in Rio de Janeiro, the city I was born, and it tells the story of three different gay young men. The first one of them is Ian. Ian starts the book at the clinic doing his HIV test, And at the clinic, he discovers that his tests come back positive, and now he is an HIV positive person. So his world kind of turns upside down because he doesn't know what it means to be an HIV positive person. And at the clinic, he meets Victor. Victor is also there doing his HIV test because he just found out that the boy he was seeing, whose name is Enrique, is an HIV positive person too. And the two of them took all the precautions and they used condoms. And Enrique told Victor that he was undetectable. But Victor is still very mad with him and kind of freak out and decides to get tested. So Victor's test came back negative, and he gets very happy about it. But he sees Ian going out of the clinic in a very bad shape, you know. And the two of them talk at a bus station, and Victor decides to put Ian and Enrique in touch because Enrique already passed these initial fears of being an HIV positive person. And at the other hand, we have the Enrique's perspective of the book. And Enrique is an HIV positive person for 3 years now, and he's not afraid of dying anymore, but he's a little bit tired of seeking new people and starting new relationships. And then when he discloses his condition, he sees those people ghost him. He already had his heart broken before because of the HIV virus, and he's not a big believer of love anymore. So we have the lives of these three characters, their friendships, their families, and we were able to see both that new knowledge that Ian will get because of his new status, and also this very complicated love story between Victor and Enrique. And that's all I can give you without any spoilers. So can I read it now and accept?
Yeah, please do.
So in this particular scene, Ian just told his best friend that he is HIV positive person, and he's kind of spiraling because he doesn't know what the virus will take away from him. So he says to his best friend, and the worst part is that it would all be different if I'd make different choices. I go on. No one says that, but I know what everyone thinks. They think of what an idiot I was for not using a condom, of how stupid I was for letting one night that wasn't even spent with someone special determine the rest of my life. No one needs to tell me because people's eyes say everything. That's what the nurse thinks, that's what you think, that's probably what the friend I talk to thinks. And his friend responds. You can look at things from that negative perspective, Ian, Gabriel responds. Or you can choose to believe that the people who support you are truly worried and want to see you well. That instead of judging you, they simply aren't. And that's the end of it. You think you're the only one to have had sex without a condom in the history of humankind? He laughs. We all screw up on a daily basis, Ian, and we snap out of the guilt or the thoughts that we deserve the bad things that happen to us along the way. I don't mean that you shouldn't cry or worry about your diagnosis, but try to look at it as a fact of life, not a punishment. You are the best person I know, man, and I'm sure you don't deserve this. But bad things happen to good people. There's no retributive system. Things are just what they are. So,
Thank you.
yes, that's it. Thank you.
You can't hear everybody applauding, but I promise they're applauding. All right, Leah, want to tell us a little bit about Crayon?
I would love to. Okay. So the quick pitch is You Should See Me in a Crown is a book about a girl named Liz Lighty, who's from a small, white, wealthy Midwestern hometown. And her main goal is to get out of that town and go to college. But those plans are derailed a little bit when Liz's financial aid falls through. And so she ends up running for prom queen for the scholarship that's associated with winning the crown. That's tough. Okay. I mean, like, that's hard enough already. But along the way, Liz kind of starts to develop feelings for her competition. And so this is where we're going to start our excerpt today. I'm only going to read a very, very short passage. This is once Liz and Mac, who is her competition for prom queen, start kicking it. I mean, they're kicking it. That's what's happening. Once they start hanging out, this is their first date. Do you actually like running for prom queen? She asks. And I have to admit, I'm a little surprised. I wasn't expecting that. I thought this experience was going to be one thing, one big, very cool thing, and it's actually just ridiculously stressful. She looks at me and winces. Is that horrible? No, I start. You have absolutely no idea how completely unhorrible that is. Her fingers slip between mine and my lap, and my heart does that thing it always does around her now. Like it can't decide whether or not to expand 5 sizes in my chest or, bust out completely. You're the best part about all this. She looks down at where our hands are linked. I would deal with the long hours and the bad volunteer gigs and the diatribes by Madame Simone all over again if it meant we could end up here. I stop breathing. I almost don't know how to be with her like this, completely alone, completely vulnerable. I just know that I want to be. I just know that there's nowhere else I'd rather be, in fact, than in this car with Amanda McCarthy.
Excellent. That doesn't get you to want to read a book. I don't know what will. It is. Yeah. Yeah, that's all I can say. All right, Kacen?
Yeah, so I'm going to be talking about King and the Dragonflies, which is about 12-year-old Kingston James, whose brother has unfortunately recently passed away, and King thinks that his brother Khalid has turned into a dragonfly. So King goes down to the bayou every day to kind of like look for the dragonfly and he thinks that his brother's turned into. But meanwhile, he's also struggling with the loss of his best friend, Sandy Sanders. Right before Khalid passed away, Khalid told King to end his friendship with Sandy because he overheard Sandy telling King that he's gay. So King is struggling with the pain of having lost his brother, but also having lost his best friend and also questioning his own identity, and then also kind of being upset with someone who has passed away and is unable to kind of explain why he said, to end this friendship over someone's identity. So there are a lot of different intersecting themes. I'm just going to read from the very beginning, first couple of paragraphs. The dragonflies live down by the bayou, but there's no way to know which one's my brother. I've never seen so many dragonflies around this time of the year. There are hundreds, maybe even thousands, just sitting on tree branches and rocks, baking in the sun, flitting over the brown water that seeps up from the dirt, zipping across the sky, showing off their ghost-like wings, happy in their own dragonfly paradise. I want to ask Khalid. I want to ask him, why do you choose a dragonfly? Why not something cooler, like a lion or a panther or a wolf? And if he were still in the body that's now buried in the ground over in the Richardson Cemetery, he might hit me upside the head with a crooked grin and say, let me alone. I can choose to be whatever I want. And I wouldn't be able to argue because I know he'd be exactly right about that.
Perfect. Thank you, Kacen. All right. Before I start my questioning, I will make 2 observations. First is I am going to ask some questions, but then you guys pretty much know the deal, right? Then I'm going to ask the audience for questions. So if you have questions, put them in the live comments. I will be scrolling through and taking them down throughout. So if you have a question, please put it in there. The second thing, which again, hopefully is obvious, but a lot of you in the comments already are saying how much you want to read these books and get these books, and how fortuitous that we are doing this with the Astoria Bookshop. They are, as you're seeing from the scrolls, selling all of these authors' books. We are sending book plates that are signed, so you can get a signed copy. So please, please, please go to the Astoria Bookshop and order these books. Order lots of other books as well. Really support them. This is the time to be supporting your independent bookstores, but especially please support these books. I know technically 2 of them aren't on sale yet, but don't worry, we're bending the rules a little bit. You can buy it today. It'll be sent tomorrow. So again, please support these authors, support this bookshop, and purchase as many copies as you can tonight. All right, so questions. First, I'm going to ask some one-on-one questions and then some group questions. I'm going to continue in the order I've set up and start with you, Lucas. So first off, I do want to talk about sort of writing about HIV. and sort of how you approach that. I mean, when I was sort of growing up, and then when I was starting as a writer, to write a story about HIV or AIDS was to basically write a tragedy. It was basically a story about death and about grief and about dealing with death. But now, 20, 30 years later, your book is about HIV, and it is very much about life, and very much about living with, not dying of. So I'd love to talk to you about sort of the approach you took to writing about such an important subject.
Yeah, when I first decided to write this book, it is exactly what you told. I want to tell a story that was not from death, but is not dying from HIV, but living in despite of HIV. Because right now we can have fulfilling lives being an HIV positive person, but I don't actually saw that in movies or in books. I always saw the books and the movies as something as tragic, or that related so much of the AIDS crisis of the 80s and the 90s. But right now it's very different, but the prejudices are not different from before. Mm-hmm. But when I decided to write, I wasn't even aware that this wasn't a topic of discussion, you know? I honestly think that I did not find any YA novels about it because I did not search in the right places, or Google was giving me the wrong answers, you know. So I wrote it in 2017, and when I was doing my research, I only found one book at the time who was YA and who was contemporary, who deals with HIV positive people. And I wanted to talk about this subject mainly because all of the prejudice, because at one hand we have this awesome evolvement of treatment, you know, they evolved so much in the past 30 or 40 years, but HIV positive people are still being harassed as if they can transmit the virus through the air, or as if a romantic or a sexual relationship with someone who is HIV positive was something unbearable or impossible to have. And so I guess we have to question ourselves right now about those fears that we have regarding HIV, and understand what is lack of information and what is pure and simple irrational fear and prejudice that we might have in our lives.
I mean, and speaking of prejudice, I mean, I would love to talk a little bit about, I mean, this is about reading with pride. And obviously, as you know, last year there was a lot of resistance to LGBT books in Brazil. There was a very let's say outrageous government official who wanted to basically ban all YA queer books from the book fair. And what, as an outside spectator, it was interesting to see that while the books were being attacked, there were a lot of defenders of the books as well. So I would really love for you to talk a little bit about what it was like to see your books challenged in that way, and sort of how the community came together to defend them.
Yeah, it was very beautiful to see those people supporting those books, because we are right now in a very right-winged government, as you guys in the US. Mm-hmm. So we have a lot of voices telling us that we are wrong, that we do not belong, and that we shouldn't be in those places of books, of movies, of theater, of anything that portrays queer persons in fiction. So I was at the book fair that year. I was gonna to talk in a panel, and while the animosities became bigger and bigger, the attention to my panel, that it was the LGBT panel of the day, was growing, and we saw a lot of people interested in hear us and what we have to say about it. And at the same time, the police was outside, and there's a lot of people talking that the police would come in the book fair to stop the panel. And it was at the same time a little anxious to me to be part of it all. But when I go out of the panel, we have this whole march of people telling those words with LGBT books in their hands and saying no to censorship. So in the end of the day, it was very beautiful to see that still there are still a lot of people that see ourselves as something wrong or something that shouldn't be there, but there's also a lot of support and a lot of love in our community, and I write for those people. I don't want to write for people who hated me. I wanted to write to people who will love me and will support my books and who will listen to what I have to say.
No, I'm very glad you do. And so finally, I do want to ask you, I mean, your book had a very strange route to being published in America. Basically, somebody at your Brazilian publisher handed the book to me. I said, I cannot read this, but Orlando dos Reis, your editor at Scholastic, could. So I passed it off to him. He fell so in love with it that he translated the first chapter himself just so the rest of us could read it. And then, of course, brought in your wonderful translator. I've sensed that this is not something you were expecting at all, that you would be here. So it is astonishing how few, both just foreign language books in general, but just Brazilian books specifically in YA, get translated, although we are working to change that. So what is it like to sort of have your book come out someplace that you didn't necessarily think it would ever be?
Yeah, it is at the same time, like, I don't know, sometimes it's like a dream that I will wake up anytime in the moment. And as you say, it was very unexpected because in the year that you came for the Brazilian Book Fair, I like to say that Orlando told in their editor's letter of the ARC that it was serendipity. We don't have that word in Portuguese, but it's one of the situations that everything falls in the right places, you know? So in 2018, I was able to publish my debut novel here in Brazil. This is my only book here in Brazil. And I got a pretty amazing deal with my agent to publish at Record, who is one of the biggest publishing houses here in Brazil. And Record is also the publishing house that translates your books, David, to here. So when my editor gave the book to you, she said to me that you asked for her. So maybe that's what she told me. And then the book was to Orlando at Scholastic, and a month later, I received this email from him telling him that he loved my book and that he wants to publish in the US. And at first, I thought that was a joke, that was a prank, because, you know, that kind of thing doesn't happen. I know the US markets are very, very competitive, 10,000 times more than Brazilian markets. So, but it all comes to be true, and I don't know, I feel like I'm living the dream, you know, because there's very few people that have that opportunity to be at the biggest market in the planet of books, that is the US and the English language. And I love that that it was so on point, everything. I published in a year that you came from Brazil. You have an editor that could read Portuguese. And so, you know, everything fell in its right places. So it was pretty amazing.
That's pretty cool. All right. Well, thank you, Lucas. Leah, I'm going to move on to you. And just a word that keeps coming up in talking about your book from the very beginning is joy. And I've seen you talk a lot about the joy of it recently as well. And so I want to start by sort of talking about that, about sort of the motivation to sort of use a book as a vehicle for expressing not just real life issues and conflict and characters, but also to express joy and what that was like writing.
Yeah, so I think especially now in this present political moment, there's nothing more radical than a Black person loving themselves and other Black folks overwhelmingly, aggressively, without apology, right? And so I think that if I'm talking about joy, I'm talking about the radical act of usurping white supremacy in your everyday life, right? And so
Right.
that was like always integral to the text for me. And I'm really fortunate that my editor, Maya, who is incredible and I think is watching this, so hey Maya, always understood that vision, and at every turn was pushing me to infuse the text with more joy. It's like, okay, I think we can put another funny passage in here. I think we could make people smile a little more if we just change this. And so constantly returning to that was such an important mission for both of us. And then we had this really beautiful cover that also reinforced this idea of radical Black girl joy. And so that's the heart work that I'm trying to do in these texts. Like, we're obviously trying to reflect life back to young people who haven't ever seen their lives reflected in books. But at the heart of that is this liberating act of seeing yourself be happy on the page as well. And so that was the work of Crown. Like, that was my ultimate goal, I think. And hopefully y'all feel happy when you read it tomorrow.
No, I mean, I think people will. I mean, again, it's not without its moments of like, oh, but yeah, I don't want to give away too much of the story, but yeah, they'll be happy. And sort of what were some of your touchstones writing it? I mean, again, because writing about high school and especially writing about prom, and there's so much American ritual that goes to it, but you really do put your own spin on it. So I'm curious, sort of how much was you just talking about sort of your own high school years? How much of it was you playing off of pop culture that you had taken in? So what were the ingredients?
Yeah, so it's like the Powerpuff Girls, like Sugar Spice, everything nice. Like, we were throwing a lot into the mix to make this happen, right? So part of it is that there is no more, in my opinion, quintessentially American high school thing than prom. And when you think about that, you distill it to its barest parts. The people who win prom king and queen then are the quintessential all-American boy and girl. And so thinking about those images, what does it mean then to turn that image on its head? So instead of this like white, pretty, traditionally pretty popular girl with blonde hair and the cheerleading skirt, what does it look like if I make the prom queen? Not to say that Liz wins prom queen. I don't know if she wins or not, but if I made the person who's a contender for prom queen queer, if I made her Black and anxious and deeply awkward, how does that change our understanding of what is and is not possible within the definition of what is all American? I thought a lot about my mom, for instance. My mom was the first integrated graduating class at her high school, and which I just want to put in perspective how like recent this is, right? And so at my mom's high school, they didn't have a prom king and queen for the entire student body. They had a white prom king and queen, and they had a Black prom king and queen, because the idea that a Black girl could win prom queen over a white girl was so absurd that they knew they had to have two completely separate races. And so I'm taking that like recent history, recent ideas of what is and is not possible for young Black girls, and also drawing in a lot of John Hughesian like references. So when I was in high school, me and my best friend got super into John Hughes. So like The Breakfast Club, Some Kind of Wonderful, Pretty in Pink were like our go-to movies. And so those images of
Oh, Leah, I think you've frozen.
flip those images on their head. And so trying to give you John Hughes but make it Black, that sort of thing.
Hallelujah. All right, and then I'm going to ask I'm not going to ask about the unexpected journey of your book from Brazil to the US, but I am going to ask you, because it is the eve of publication, I mean, how much has this journey, as of like the night before the book comes out, is it what you were expecting? Like, was there anything in particular that surprised you about the whole process so far?
Well, David, I tell you what, on my 2020 bingo card, I certainly didn't have a pandemic or a race war. And so these two things are like, we absolutely were not expecting that. I was anticipating that the night before my debut, I was going to be most concerned about whether or not somebody was going to buy my book from Bookshop or from Amazon. That's what I wanted to worry about. And now I'm thinking differently about the work in general and about my role in putting this work out into the world. And so what is the responsibility of the fiction writer in this present moment? What is the responsibility of fiction right now? Those are the things that are most pressing to me, I think. But I certainly, but outside of that, when I was in grad school, I was in my first year of grad school writing my first manuscript, which will never make it out of a drawer. But I was working on that thing, and I never thought that it would be possible to write a book that does what I set out to do, and You Should See Me in a Crown, and that's to write Black joy and Black liberation and coming of age and make it cute and make it funny and get the girl the happy ending in the end. You know, I still wasn't even able to conceptualize a book like that. And so the fact that this thing exists and we were able to will it into being, I mean, this certainly is not what I was expecting.
No, absolutely. And then hopefully this is just the beginning of many, 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 many books, which
David,
is a good segue for me to Kacen. Because again, Kacen in just a very short time has become the veteran on the panel because their first book is not coming out tomorrow. So by de facto, by having a book published, you are the veteran of the panel. But I really actually do want to ask you to start just about progression and about exploring different aspects of your identity, or just different aspects of identity in general that you want to explore from book to book. That you have done something remarkable already in your career. That, I mean, you wrote Hurricane Child, which won awards and was phenomenal, and you could have very much written very similar stories and in similar settings, and everybody would have been very happy. But instead, you really are, from book to book, just changing it up and really exploring things that feel complementary to one another, but at the same time are wholly original each time. So I'd love to just start by sort of saying, do you see this progression, and do you have sort of sit down with a purpose with each book? And specifically with King, sort of after Hurricane Child, was there something you wanted to do with King that was different than Hurricane Child?
Yeah, I think when I sit down to write a book, I think about different lessons that I've had to learn in my life, and those lessons end up kind of being like the themes of the books and sort of like different messages. For Hurricane Child, the message that kind of like came out of that book was the importance of figuring out or finding community in unexpected ways, I guess, and being willing to kind of forgive people that have hurt you in order to maintain connection. And for King and the Dragonflies, I think that I was thinking about community, and King is already kind of like a part of a community. And in comparison to Caroline, she felt very alone and very isolated. King has his friends. He has family that's kind of helping him come to terms with his grief for his brother. But he has to find a different sort of courage than Caroline did, where he has to figure out his identity and whether coming out to people in his community means that, if that necessarily is a definition of bravery, or if it's enough to only come out to himself. So in the end, I think, there are multiple like messages and multiple themes and lessons that I put into the books, but I think that was one of the differences. With King, I wanted to make the point that you don't necessarily need to come out to anyone in order to be considered brave. It's enough to come out to yourself. And it's enough to have that sort of pride for yourself. And especially, thinking about Sandy and how he was in an abusive, dangerous situation, and he came out to his father. I wanted to say that it's okay to not come out to younger people if you feel like you're in an unsafe place or location. I think that every Pride, I love it when people come out. I think it's such a great celebration, but I think it can kind of create like a sense of urgency or a sense of like you're not being true to yourself if you don't come out. So I kind of wanted to explore that with King.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do want to talk about Felix a little bit, if only because I love it so much. Because I think it's an interesting following. It's kind of an epic love story where when we were sort of doing events for it, you were saying how you sort of wanted it to be sort of not about the identity, but really about the dynamics. Whereas Felix, I mean, identity does play into it more. And so I'm curious about that evolution from one book to the next.
Yeah, for this is kind of an epic love story. Absolutely, a lot of what Leah was talking about earlier, where it's like this kind of revolutionary joy. So I wanted to look at a world that did not think about racism or anti-queerness or transphobia or ableism or anything that we deal with on a daily basis, because we're more than just our struggles. I wanted to give a book to young readers where they existed and their conflict was whether this person liked them back or not. And that was it. They didn't have to think about things that we already deal with. On the other hand, I also see the worthiness in discussing things that are happening, acknowledging the pain, acknowledging the transphobia, the racism, the anti-queerness, and kind of forming community and forming kind of like a blueprint, if you will, of what do you do when you are attacked. What are your emotional steps? How do you come together for one another? So for Felix Ever After, I thought that it was, there actually is like a little conversation in the book about the importance of labels in this way. So there isn't, like, I purposely didn't have any labels mentioned at all, and this is kind of an epic love story. Right. You don't know if anyone considers themselves queer or bisexual or pansexual. There are no labels in that sense. Felix Ever After, they sit down and they discuss the differences, the different importances of whether it's important to have a label or not, and why it means something to some people and why it might not mean anything to others. And I think my main goal was to say it's okay across the board, regardless of whether you think it's important to have a label for yourself, as long as you respect another person's choice. I feel like that was the main message I wanted to come out of that. But there definitely was a conversation between the two books of why it's important to have these labels, where, Felix is dealing with transphobia and racism, and, the labels have a sense of importance because of those conflicts. But with Epic Love Story, it was kind of a question of, well, what will do labels have any importance if we are in a society that doesn't have to deal with any of these sorts of things? That was the kind of question I wanted to ask.
Yeah, that's and it is beautifully played out in the book, I have to say. So I want to now ask all three of you a question, and I'm also going to prompt the viewers at home. I assume you're all at home. Just please send in questions if you do have any questions for the authors. Put them into the comment section. But just to talk again, about the question of pride and writing about pride and the theme of pride. That I think all of us as queer authors, I think one of the questions that comes up is sort of the proportion of pride and shame and fear that you want your characters to have. And again, there's no right or wrong answer here. But I'm just curious, when you approach writing characters, what are there boundaries you don't want to cross? Are there things that you're especially proud of that you want to emphasize? And just how the issue of pride comes into how you write and what you choose to write. Anyone can start.
So let me start. I guess that the thing that I'd like to emphasize on my books is the community feeling of being a queer person and not always have the support of your family by blood. So you have to find your family in your friends, in your teachers, in your librarians, and in everyone that surrounds you. And I also love to address the happy endings that we all deserved. Mm-hmm. I am not much of a tragic reader, a tragic writer. I do not like very much tragedies. I love so much comedy, and I love so much uplifting moments and uplifting books. So even when things does not go all the right way from the beginning, I always make sure that at the end, if the character does not have a happy ending, he or she or they are looking towards a happy ending. You know, that's my main goal in my books. That's what I wanted to do in my books, is either a happy ending or either looking for a happy ending, knowing that you have hope to a happy ending.
That's great. Leah or Kacen?
Yeah, I think to Lucas's point about emphasizing the importance of happy endings, for a really long time, the only image that a lot of young queer people, in particular queer people of color, even more narrowed queer Black people, got to see were images in which we did not get stories without trauma. If maybe we got to be with someone in the end, it was because we had earned that ending through suffering. And so I'm interested in writing away from suffering, not writing away from how queerness and Blackness exist in the real world, but certainly without placing the emphasis on that in the story. I think that's crucial for me. I think also in that same vein, making really clear how intersectionality affects queer identity is crucial to me in my own life, but also in my writing. Liz's story is not just about her being young and queer. It's also about her being a young Black, and it's also about her being young and living in relative poverty. It's about her being young and having family members who are chronically ill. And all those things work together to affect the way she moves through the world. And so I think that was really important for me as far as like queer storytelling was concerned.
Yeah, I 10,000% agree with making sure that there are happy endings, especially for young readers when there can be such a sense of hopelessness for so many. For King and the Dragonflies, I did want to look at the question of shame to spark a conversation between the intersection of being Black and being queer. Because when I was younger, and this is something that's in the book also, I was told that Black people can't be gay. That's only something that white people can be, which is completely ridiculous. But that kind of creates a sense of shame. I think that's a realistic thing that I know that young readers are struggling with. And I wanted to kind of discuss that and portray like a character who is struggling with the fear that he won't be loved by his family because he's queer, and coming to terms with his queerness for himself. In the end, for King's story in particular, he does come to terms with his queerness and he is loved by his family, and I really want to show that. But I also want to acknowledge the pain that isn't always the case. It should be, but it isn't always the case.
All right, we have a couple of questions from the people who are watching. One of them is about the editing process, and I'll expand it to writing process. About, was there anything that got edited out or was hard to let go in the process, either when you were revising yourself before it was handed to your editor or after it went to your editor?
Okay, let me start. Being translated to the US, we have to do a little bit of different things for the American audience, because there are some references that were particularly for Brazilian readers, which TV shows or music or movies that the American audience might not know very well. But by my process of writing and editing, I was so glad that there wasn't very much to let go of. The mainly core of the book was the same as the first draft. So there was a little bit of difference here and there about the tone of some scenes, or how far will I go about this particular part of the book. But in general, for what I remember, because this book is 3 years of existence now, I don't remember very much about the writing process more anymore. But what I do remember is that we don't have, in my case, to change much about it.
I think one of our concerns, which is just so sad, is that for your characters, getting medication to treat their HIV is so much easier than it is here in America with our healthcare system. And so reading the book, we were like, oh, this is too easy. And we actually had to put a note at the end saying, treatment here is different than there. It's too bad. All right. Any, Kacen or Leah, anything?
Yeah, I tell you what. I had a real tough time revising this book, and this is why. This is the only book I've ever written. It's the only one now I've written two. But at the time, it was the only thing that I'd ever written, the only thing I'd ever finished. And so one of the drafts of Crown was in the neighborhood of like 90,000 words or something, which for those of you who are not familiar with word counts, 90,000 plus for a contemporary rom-com, not great, not really, not traditional in terms of pacing and size. The book would have been about this big. And so when we were editing, we had to cut away so much of what I thought was integral to the book. I thought you needed everybody's backstory, honey. You was gonna get the peripheral characters, birthday, party memories from when they were 5 years old. I was really trying to pack it in there, and my editor was like, Leah, get to the heart of the story. Like, we don't need all this. And that was hard to let go of because you have to kill your darlings, and I was not prepared to kill them.
I'm seriously racking my brain. I cannot think of anything that was hard to let go of. Definitely went through the revision process, especially for Felix. Like the antagonist, who I'm not going to spoil, it was actually like two other people. So that changed, but it wasn't hard to let go of because I was like, this makes complete sense. Like, you're right, editor. So I don't have an answer to that question.
All right, well, I'm going to ask you to start off the answer for the next question because it just applies to your book so well. I'm going to go with Taylon's question here. Setting plays such a big role in each of your books. Can you talk about how place impacted your stories? And obviously, King and the Dragonflies, the setting is so important.
Yeah, setting is going to be important in terms of just from like the craft perspective, when thinking about like plot and character and how in conflict and how it all impacts the character, setting is always going to be a big part of that. So for Hurricane Child, it was important that it was on St. Thomas, and from Caroline's perspective, because of kind of like the magical realism that comes through with the conflict of like this woman in black that follows her, and kind of like the lore of the islands for King and the Dragonflies, that setting was important because of the racism that King experiences and how that impacts his intersectionality with his queerness. And, I could go on and on, but, I think setting will always be important in terms of how it impacts the character and their journey.
Leah or Lucas?
Yeah, I think to retweet what Kacen has said, You Should See Me in a Crown is an incredibly place-based book. I think for me, I could not imagine that story set anywhere but in a community really close to the community where I was raised. And so I was interested in exploring like not just how Blackness and queerness works together in the world, but specifically how it plays out in a community in which you're surrounded by straight white people. Because when I grew up, I spent a lot of time positioning my Blackness or understanding my Blackness as it related to whiteness. And so I wanted to write a story in which a character could explore their Blackness separate from whiteness at the, ultimately in the end. And yeah, and also they do so much stuff that they could only do in Indianapolis that there was no way I could have said it maybe in like Westchester or something, which is where I went to grad school, but it would have lost its local flavor, and that's the heart of it.
And to me, setting was fundamental because of what you told about the treatment here in Brazil, specifically where the story takes place, which is in a big city, is Rio de Janeiro, you know, and the treatment centers are very close one another. It's not the same if you go to the north part of the country or the northeast part of the country. So to tell that story, I wanted to tell of something that I know, of something that I could go to talk to people. And one of the characters does college where I did college. So it take a lot of places that I know and that I could, at the first time, being my first novel, that I could describe in a more appropriate way, you know, without using Google Street, Google Earth, or something like that. And I guess that writing in Brazil is what makes this book, I don't know, this book, you know, because if I told that story from the US perspective, for example, I would have to change basically the whole treatment story about how easier they get the treatment. And that one of the things that I want to emphasize is how good our treatment here in Brazil is. We don't have a lot of good things in regard of public health, but the HIV treatment is one of the references in the world. So I like so much to emphasize that.
Yeah. All right, we have time for one or two more. I'm going to go with Min's question. What is it like to now find yourself as people who have fans and a following? Is it like you expected it to be? And I will extend that to say also just readers. All of you have heard from people who've read your books by now. I mean, again, there were advanced reader copies for those of you whose books haven't come out yet. So you're starting to get a sense of sort of this book that has lived in your head is now going out in the world. And Kacen obviously have a little more experience, but especially writing for younger kids too, and sort of getting feedback from them and from teachers and librarians as well, sort of what that response is like and how that changes your relationship to the writing. Who wants to start?
I can start.
Go for it, Leah.
Okay. I was just gonna say that, like, you know, you write so much of yourself, or at least this is the case for me. I wrote so much of myself into this book that every time somebody takes a picture with the book now, I'm like, that is my heart in your hands. And I'm asking people who don't know me to hold it gently. And the world is not gentle. And so, you know, thinking about like the way people are going to respond to this story that is so deeply personal to me is like very intimidating. And I didn't think about it as much as I probably should have when I wrote it. And so that's really strange. I don't know if I have fans. I don't think that's the case yet. Except for Lucas. Lucas.
Right.
And I'm also.
Yeah, I am too, and I know at least like half of Scholastic is. So yeah, I think you're starting your Dumbledore army pretty nicely.
Wow. Okay, the strength of that. But I will say that, you know, I'm much more careful with the things that I say in public now, because people know me, but I don't know them. And so you only know exactly what I give you. And I have to be really careful about like making sure that everything that I put out now is like, you know, very much in line with what I want people to understand about me. Like when you come to me, I want you to know exactly what you're getting. So yeah, that's something I'm thinking about.
Yeah, I didn't realize that it would be as emotional. Definitely people have reached out with very heartfelt stories that I don't know why I managed to convince myself that as like a writer, I just like tell my story and I'm just kind of like closed off. Like, I just put the book out there and it's done. You know, it's definitely like it almost becomes like an ongoing conversation where I write a book actually kind of in response to some things that people have told me, either in letters or in person at panels.
And I was terrified when I published my first book because, I come from a very traditional and Catholic family. So the fact that I am out to the world as a gay man is not something that our family discuss much. It's one of those things that Brazilian people do of not talking about it. So the problem doesn't exist. But at the same time, I received this book is already out in Brazil for 2 years now, so I already received a lot of good and positive things, even more than I could ever expected. And I was also terrified because I was tackling on a topic that I have to be very good. I have to take very good care of because I cannot spread misinformation or I cannot use the wrong terminology on this book. And the day that a doctor sent me an email telling about how much they love the book is one of the most fulfilling days of my life, because it's something that, yes, I did it. I at least this doctor doesn't seem to address some problem with my book. And as social media, I try to be very ahead of what I'm going to talk about it, but at the same way, sometimes at 3 a.m. in the morning, I'm like retweeting a lot of memes and in hopes that no one's are seeing. So I guess that's it.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think just to tie to the theme of pride, I mean, for me, that is where I get the most pride is from the reader response and for understanding what books can do. And then I'm lucky because I get it as both an author and as a publisher and seeing that what books can do. And one of the questions in here, which we won't have time to get to, is sort of in these crazy times, how do you sort of manage to keep going as a writer? And I think for me, it is you just really arm yourself with all of those responses and know the positivity that your books can put out there. And in positivity, meaning not a bright and sunny outlook, but positivity in that it can actually make people's lives better. And that is a great task as a human being to go for and aim for. And as authors, I think all of you do that so well and get the response that deserves. All right. And so we're going to get to the last question, which I warned you ahead of time I would ask. So right now you're like, oh man, I was going to write that list. So again, for pride and again, because books are meaningful, I did want to close by asking you, again, I want everybody watching this to please buy Lucas, Leah, and Kacen's books. Buy as many copies as you can, gift them, put them out into the world, and please buy them from Astoria Bookshop and support a local bookstore that really does amazing things and has brought us all together tonight. So besides these people's books, I wanted to ask them for recommendations of other books that we can read with pride, whether it's something that's just come out, something that is an old favorite, or something just particularly meaningful. And it can be one, it can be more than one, whatever you want to share. But if you were recommending books, what are some recommendations you would make?
Can I go first?
Sure. Yes, please.
Okay, today I have two book recommendations that I think when David asked this question. So the first one is Tyler Johnson Was Here by J. Cole. I hope I not butcher your last name. And it is a book that tackles directly on police brutality and how it can affect the lives of the family of someone who suffers it, And I guess it's a book that I don't know, at least here in Brazil, this one does not get a translation yet, but is a book that I don't see many people talking about. And it is a fantastic book, and it's a book about anger, and it's a book about mourn, and it is about what someone can do and how they can deal with all of those feelings, regarding police brutality. And the other one, because I'm a little biased, is one of a Brazilian fellow, which is Here the Whole Time by Victor Martins. It is a book that will come out on November 10. And it is a rom-com also about a fat boy who has to spend 15 days with his lifelong crush in a room. They have to divided one room, and is very lighty and it's very funny, and it discusses a lot about fat phobia and a lot of body image, and is also set in Brazil. So yay, Brazilians in the world.
All right.
All right. Okay. So back to the original order of things. Thank you, Lucas, for straightening us out. My recommendation is All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson. I snagged this arc a couple months ago, and it has been like a manifesto for me over the past couple of months. It's this beautiful rumination on race and queerness and violence, actually. And I think in all times this is a crucial book to have, but especially right now when we're thinking about race and the body and safety and what that looks like moving forward. I think this is integral. Everybody needs this on their shelf.
Amen.
I'm going to recommend my old-time favorite. I always say it is Aristotle and Dante, Discover the Secrets of the Universe. But because I'm sure that everyone knows and loves it, or I hope you do, I'm not going to talk about it, but I do always have to say that book. Cameron Garrett's Full Disclosure is a really brilliant, recent-ish YA. It also takes a look at HIV from the perspective of a queer Black girl. And then We Are Totally Normal by Rahul Kanakia is a really brilliant look at what it's like to question your identity. Felix Ever After has some questioning, but I feel like Rahul really took it to a really personal and believable and realistic level that I related to so strongly, where it's like literally every single day you start to question your identity again and think, am I this? Am I that? I'm not sure. I never have really seen it done in that way. So I really, really love and appreciate that book.
Awesome. All right. I wish I could talk for more hours with you guys. I will say that, again, please check all of these authors' social media. They are doing more live events. We are doing more Read with Pride events. If you go to iReadYA, you will be able to see the full listing. We have 3 more, and all 3 of these authors will be back for another round with another group of authors, which is really exciting. And again, there are also launch week. I know Leah, you have a very full dance card this week, which is exciting. And again, it's really, really exciting to be with you all together. When times are tough, it is a great reminder of the value of what we do, and why we do what we do, to have these conversations. And just looking at the comments, I can see that it has meant a lot to a lot of the people watching as well. So I just want to thank you for joining us. Thank all of you who've been watching, and most of all, thank you to Astoria Bookshop for supporting us and for supporting these books. And again, encouraging everybody to please go to their website and purchase these books and support these authors in this bookshop. So thank you all for now, and we're done. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank you,
everybody.